Okay, may I begin?
A very good morning to all of you. So I formally welcome Rohan and Ashish for our event also. This is our second event for our sir, Legal Entrepreneurship and Incubation sir. So Ankit, over to you. You please initiate.
Good morning to all of you and the heartiest welcome to the students, alumni and the faculty members who have joined us here today. First, let me express my immense gratitude to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dr. Mahesh Verma, and our revered Registrar, Sri Ravi Dadit sir, for giving us this platform to conduct this program. The Legal Entrepreneurship and Incubation Cell is the brainchild of our Honorable Dean Sir, Professor Dr. Amar Pal Singh, and is led under the capable guidance of its faculty coordinators, Dr. Anuradha Jha ma'am and Dr. Zubair Ahmed Khan sir. The event we have today is not a traditional webinar. Titled Alumni Talk in conversation with Rohan Sridhar and Ashish Bhardwaj, the event is just that. It's a conversation. A conversation with two of our esteemed alumni where we understand and reflect on their journeys this far and learn all we can from their experiences. Participants are strictly requested to keep themselves on mute throughout the session to avoid any disturbances. Questions may be posted in the chat box and we will try to take them up towards the end. Let me introduce our esteemed panel to you. We have with us today Mr. Rohan Sridhar. Esteemed alumnus of GGS IPU, Rohan is currently an entrepreneur. He is the co-founder of Terra Economics and Analytics Lab, or TEAL as we will call it today. In his journey, he has worked in a couple of major law firms in India and he holds a master's in law from Georgetown University, Washington, D.C., US. Welcome, sir. We are honored to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
And joining him is Revered Mr. Ashish Bhardwaj. Ashish is currently working as a business legal partner at SERS. He has traveled a fascinating path from law toward management, where he started in independent practice by establishing his own law firm, Amicus Legal, and moved on to complete a postgraduate program in management from MDI Gurgaon. It is a privilege to host you, sir.
Thank you.
If our panelists are comfortable, may we begin with the discussion?
Yeah, sure.
I'll begin with Ashish, sir. So,
You can skip the sir part. We have our professors here. Let's keep sir for that.
Okay. Ashish, you are currently working as a business legal partner at SERS. Could you explain to me a little what a business legal partner does? I'm just a little unclear about this position.
Sure. So Sears is not in a very traditional business. The whole industry has just is still in the nascent stage. It is still developing. And as things are progressing, especially due to COVID, everybody will have to move to cloud, will have to somehow automate a lot of processes. Right now, the time taken, it's not just about employing a lot of people, but the time that it takes to solve a problem internally, or sort of like Rohan's work is also that they have automated something and that they're solving the problem. So people will need services like this, but law is still not there. You do not have the skilled professionals who can just join from a legal background and help the organization take its vision forward. So my organization's goals and objectives will not be defined in terms of legal function. So there will be a gap between what the understanding of my in-house counsel is and what the objective of my business is. So there my role comes in, where I partner with the rest of the functions within the organizations, be it marketing, sales, be it IT administration, anyone. So wherever there is a requirement for legal input, I can help translate that business objective with my business understanding into something which my in-house counsel can understand. Apart from this, I am also responsible for the delivery of my function. So I am there responsible to cater to two kind of clients. One is my in-house clients. So on a daily basis, we have to cater to requests from sales, marketing, everywhere. It could be review, it could be research. Then we have to go on client negotiations and make them understand. So there you need an understanding of business as well, because a contract will not just have legal clauses, it will also have commercial clauses. There you need to understand how it is going to affect your top line, how you are losing on your margin, is it a risk worth taking or not. So those assessments, you need some business understanding. That is where my role comes.
I understand. So would you say the work is more legal or managerial? Or is it
So
a perfect combination of both?
perfect is, I think, an illusion in corporate. So no matter what job description you have, you will have to go beyond it and work on it. So right now I'm even involved in some finance projects. I am also looking after some of the legal. So we have a very small legal function we are currently building. So I'm also involved in hiring more people for the function. I'm also building algorithms or processes which can then be automated. So it's a
Right.
mix. There are days when suppose there are people on leave in my team, then I will have to pick up that analyst work and do it. So in corporate, you have to take ownership of the whole function and
Right.
then make sure that the work is done.
Understand. So how did you become a business legal partner? Like, is it a role where you are promoted to, or you directly got this job? And what are some things that may have helped you land this job?
So it was during my campus placements. I was being interviewed for some other roles, some strategy and marketing roles. There, the interview, my second round was being taken by the CEO because I have applied for CEO office itself. Now there, uh, because my profile, obviously my work ex and my past education from law, they opened this role and asked me if I'd like to take it up. So that is how it happened. I was not promoted. I directly joined. It is not a very senior level position. It's a mid level position.
Okay. Okay. I'll move to Rohan, sir. You are currently, since if I'm not wrong, you are in Teal since 2018.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, I want to know, is Teal your first entrepreneurial venture or did you have startups before Teal as well?
Actually, Teal is the first entrepreneurial venture, and hopefully it lasts, and I don't have to open another one. But yeah, Teal is the first one.
Okay. So could you first explain to me a little what Teal does, what it aims to do?
Yeah, sure. So I think everybody in India has faced this problem at some point of time or the other. Especially, I mean, everybody on the call, some of their family members would have faced an issue when they're buying or selling real estate assets. There's a real information gap, especially in terms of who the owner of the property is, what the valuation of the property is, how a transaction can close, and basically there's no ecosystem to guide you end to end from a discovery to ultimately closing the transaction and filling in the missing pieces. The missing pieces include two things that are really valuable. A, which is that the title chain is clear, so that you don't lose the money that you're going to invest in, and B, the valuation of the property is something which is determined based on what the market is actually at, right?
Hmm.
The problem was that so in India, real estate by far is the biggest investment an individual will make in his lifetime, right? Buying a house, selling a particular property, it's a complex transaction because of the amount of money that is involved. Even for banks, when they distribute a mortgage, there are a certain set of processes that have to be followed. So it's a time-consuming process. What we're trying to do is we're trying to automate a lot of this process using data. And this is something we realized when we were conducting our research before starting Teal for a couple of years. In fact, the research process was going on for 2.5, 3 years between me and my co-founder Kshitij. We realized that there is a lot of public data on real estate assets that can be aggregated at an individual address level to be able to create unique property profiles. This is something similar to what is there in developed markets like the US, where you have companies like Zillow, Trulia, CoLogic that have been able to essentially create property profiles at an address level. A lot of it was possible because the government from 2005-6 onwards made a push on digitizing land records, making the information out there in a lot of public forums, right? And we were then able to build large-scale ingestion technology and transformation technology to deal with the language issues and non-standardization of information and formatting issues. So right now we're at a level where we operate in more than 24 cities, and we have close to 40 million plus addresses for which we've been able to create unique property profiles. The company as a business is still in its very nascent stage, and we're actually at a level where We're yet to determine the correct product market fit, whether it's going to be on the consumer side, whether it's going to be on the mortgages side, or whether it's going to be, say, a transaction closing platform, a discovery platform. That is something which we're figuring out, and we're in the process of raising more capital to be able to do that and expand our team. But the goal is fairly simple. If you're looking to buy and sell a property, you come on the Teal ecosystem, just type out the address, it'll give you the profile, tell you whether the title is clear, whether there's any litigation, what the valuation of that particular property is, and what all will be required to close that particular transaction. Create that entire ecosystem wherein if you require a mortgage, you're able to access it on Teal. You require an escrow before closing the transaction, you're able to do it on Teal. So basically an end-to-end transaction closing platform for real estate is what the vision is, but we're still in the process of figuring out the right way to go about it.
Okay, that's great. Coming a little to your team is like something so ideal. Every entrepreneur would look for it, like an economist and a law student come together and they make a startup of this precise nature. So how did it come together? How did you meet your co-founder? How was this idea incepted?
Okay, I met my co-founder in Bombay. So I just finished my master's, and I'd come back and I joined this think tank called IDFC Institute. And Kshitij, my co-founder, was previously he was the chief economist of Housing.com in 2013-14. So he was working in IDFC Institute on research on the housing markets of India. And we both co-wrote a report on affordable housing in India and the kind of policy interventions that can go in to increase the supply of affordable housing. And we used to stay in Bandra. We were neighbors, go running in the evening and just talk a lot about real estate, housing. And I think that's where the idea was initially seeded that, okay, there's something that can be done. And then Kshitij went on to work for the government. I joined a few law firms for a short period of time, didn't really like working there. And then we reconnected when he was in Delhi, and we were drinking beers, having a discussion on what is happening. He wasn't happy with government. And then we realized that we were discussing this idea for a long time and whether it can be done. And finally, we decided it can be done and might as well do it ourselves than wait for somebody else to pick up on the idea and go with it. So it's just, I mean, a lot of these things, it's very, I mean, in hindsight, it looks like it was something that is meant to happen, but a lot of this is just random events. So which are highly unpredictable. So I mean, just one decision, you take a yes or no, the outcome can be completely different. So a meeting and starting it, I mean, in true honesty, it was mostly a random event. And now when you look back and say you're going to start it, you think about 100 different consequences that can happen. But at that time, we just took the punt and did it.
Okay, so I believe you are both in your jobs when you started thinking about going into this entrepreneurial venture, right? So there is a question many young entrepreneurs face. Maybe you would be able to shed some light on it. Should you leave your job and go all in your entrepreneurial venture for it to succeed, or should you keep a paying job on the side so that it can provide you some stability and work in odd hours towards your startup? Which one do you think?
That's a very interesting question. And so the thing is that there's no right answer to a question like this because it all depends on your circumstance. So I'll give you an example. I was fairly lucky because my parents were in the civil services. I didn't really have a financial burden of supporting them or supporting any member of the family. The salary which I was earning from my job was essentially pocket money. So I had that cushion and leverage to be able to take that risk of leaving the job, staying with my parents, and still not feeling the financial crunch of being able to not support my family or, take care of responsibilities that are out there, because essentially I didn't have one because I was lucky. And this is something which Warren Buffett calls the ovarian lottery. It's something you can't predict. It's where you're born. So the corollary to that is that there are many people who don't have that luxury and they've had to basically start companies while they were doing something on the side. I think the biggest and the largest example of that are the Wright brothers. They were cycle repairmen who as a hobby were trying to build a plane. So, so it's not straightforward, because all these the answer to this depends on your circumstance and where you are at what point of time in your life. If you read this book of Jack Ma, the house that Jack Ma built, the initial days of Alibaba, he was also working part-time for the government, giving English classes, and then using that money to fund Alibaba because his financial situation was different. So I think it all depends on circumstances and an individual's background, history, where he comes from, what sort of financial situation he is in, to be able to take that decision. There's no right or wrong. You can make a company successful by completely quitting your job and going all in, and you can screw it up as well. And you can make a company successful by starting late, by first doing your job and then probably using your spare time to work on it and then make it successful, or you can screw it up. So there's no right or wrong. I think it's just everybody's own journey and how they wish to move forward depending on their circumstances.
Okay, I understand. Okay, so moving to Ashish, the next thing I wanted to know about was a postgraduate program in management. You did a postgraduate program in management from MDI Gurgaon. Could you just again shed some light on what's the nature and curriculum of this course, like what career opportunities open up after doing this course?
So in India, everybody calls it MBA. MBA has just started a couple of years back. So MBA is a degree, whereas what everybody had in India was a postgraduate diploma in management. That is PGDM or PGPM. IIMs have been made a university, so they now can issue degrees. Everybody else had diplomas. So it is essentially same thing. If you apply outside of this, you get an equivalent certificate. So it is a curriculum where you study, basically what MBA is applied economics. It is then divided into some specializations like operations, strategy, marketing. There are new courses coming up dealing with AI. So they are just trying to, the idea here is to solve the customer's problem, do it efficiently, and also make a lot of money with it. That is what we are trying to do in any business, right? So MBA, what they do is they teach you a lot of these things which are required in a business. The aim is to be able to scale a solution to a level which is profitable. There is economies of scale that you can achieve. So if you take Rohan's example here, they have come with a brilliant solution. They are in a stage where he's still talking about finding the right product fit. Once they have it, they want to scale it to be able to achieve those economies of scale. So that is where our education comes in. It has nothing to do with entrepreneurship. You don't need an MBA to be an entrepreneur. You need to have that spirit, have the right team, be able to raise money, and obviously need a solution. Do you want me to go in detail about the curriculum, the kind of subjects we study?
You could just tell me the subjects there were. What are the fixed subjects and are there electives?
Yeah, the electives come in the second year. So I'll tell you about my college. There were 3 branches in the postgraduate program. One was the HR. So that was a completely separate course. That is the HR specialization. You don't get any option of any other specialization with it. Their courses revolve around recruitment or incentivizing their or measuring performance and things like that. Then there is the main course, which is the PGPM, which I did. Then in the first year, we'll study courses about supply chain. We will study courses about core marketing or strategy. We also had courses in economics. We also had courses in law, just one, but it was there. Then in the second year, you will get a chance to choose your own electives. So if you want to specialize in an area, you need minimum 5 subjects in that particular specialization. So there I had an option of choosing a major and a minor. I did not. I like marketing, so I wanted to completely take all the subjects from marketing and 1 or 2 from other branches. Then there is a course of international business. Those guys study 1 year here, and then for another year, they go to Europe in ESCP and get an MIM from there, which is Masters in Management.
Okay.
And the curriculum is decided more or less by AICTE in this country, but across the globe you will get some additions of subjects, some different subjects, depending on where the most recruiters come from.
Okay.
If you have some niche profile in your mind, then you will find a college. Even in India, those exist. So if you have banking in your mind, then there are management colleges which are dealing for in banking. If you have advertising in your mind, then we have a good college in Gujarat, BICA, which is for that. So that depends on it. A curriculum in MBA is not fixed. It's more about networking. It's more about developing your own skills of being able to sell yourself the product,
Hmm.
being able to make sure that you understand the world how it is. So my strategy professor used to say you have to see the world how it is. You cannot just assume that it will function the way you want it to. So MBA is about that.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry you are audible to me, but some people are saying that your voice is a little low. Maybe you could.
Is it low for everyone?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, are you able to hear me?
No, I think it is fine. No issues. No,
Okay.
we can go ahead.
Okay.
He can check on his from his side, that fellow.
Okay. Good enough. And can you tell me how was the life at MDI Gurgaon?
So we are one of those COVID batches. 1 year was at campus,
Ah,
which was the first year, so it was hell. And the second year, when we thought everything will be good, we were at home. So again, kind of hell because we missed most of the MBA fun. But MDI has one great thing about it, that it is in Gurgaon. So we have a lot of party places nearby. Something which is very, very important for an MBA.
Hmm.
So I'll tell you how MBA is like. This was something that I did not know. Probably now I say if I had that knowledge, I might have gone ahead and done something else also. Might have pursued it from outside. So MBA in India is about placements. That is one thing that I've raised in my college also. I raised it with Dean. I said this is not the way to go. There are great courses in there. Economics is actually very interesting to study, and then applied economics, bifurcating it into marketing, operations. It's really amazing to study. But in India, the main focus is on placement. You go on LinkedIn around the summer placement time or final placement time, be it IIM Ahmedabad, be it Bangalore, everybody is just posting their brochures. So how a typical journey is, your first 1 or 2 weeks is about induction. I will be very honest with everyone here, just in case you're considering MBA. You're supposed to stay awake up to 20 hours a day.
Okay.
And you don't get to sleep that 4 hours in one stretch. You could be asked to be in the auditorium at 3 in the morning, 2 in the morning. You could be there at 12 noon. You could have finished the session at 6 in the morning and then back in the auditorium or class at 8. You could have your exams and it doesn't matter to them because that is what they're training you for. Because once you're in business, you might need to, and given the kind of roles you get, you might need to be awake for a long time. You need to be, you might be busy in a situation which is a business crisis. You cannot say, no, I have done my 8-hour shift and I will not do it. So that is why that hell is created intentionally. It has a lot to do with the corporate culture we have, but things are improving now. Not in the campus, but in the corporate world. And apart from that, we get a lot of corporate interactions. So again, being in Gurgaon, that allows a lot of multinationals and the leaders to come. So we will have interactions with CEOs and CXOs from across companies. You can name the major companies and we have had talks with them. So you can ask the questions, try to understand how they build their business, what is it that they do, what is it that they're doing. So just from the courses that we have, we can also see how that is being applied in the real life and what is not being applied. So a lot of senior leaders will tell us that even if you have read something in the book, that does not apply in the real world, but things have moved on. Marketing itself has changed, supply chain itself has changed. So earlier, people were building solutions for a target group. Now the talk for the future is that you will serve each and every customer. That is called a long tail marketing, where you give a solution to each person. Because what we are saying is that there is a lot of consumer base which is still unserved. So things are changing. To have that dynamic nature in any study, you will need to interact with industry. I think that is what the aim of this club also in some sort.
Yes. Okay. Just one more question from MDI. I know you have been a part of the market research club there. You have been a part of the MES committee there. Can you shed some light on how these experiences have helped you?
So MES committee was a personal choice, hostel MES committee that just tells you how to interact with multiple stakeholders. I don't think that matters a lot. I was just living in the hostels at residential program, so I wanted to be part of it. The other two things which I did, I think I missed Toastmasters. That helps you because that again is about networking. Toastmasters is a club which has participants from government, which has participants from corporates, leaders from there. So once you're part of it, you can interact with them and build a relation with them, and it will help you to grow in your career. The other was market research club. As I said, I was interested in marketing, and what our club does was not simple market research. We are into disguised market research. So we will research, but we will not let the participant know that they are being researched on. So how we used to do it, we had 5 flagship events. One of the most important one was a Diwali Mela. So we will organize it like a Mela on our campus, invite everybody who wants to come. There would be game stalls, there would be music, there would be good food and everything. In between those stalls, there would be our own stalls, which the club was running. They again could have activities or games. You will come participate in those activities and games based on the choices you have made. We will understand your behavior. So that consumer behavior we'll gather from it without you letting go. So if I come to you and ask you a direct question, you might not give me the right answer. There may be biases that will prevent you from giving the right answer. But if I do it in disguised way, you don't have a choice. So that way, we used to research, and that experience really helped. We have worked with companies like Decathlon, HUL. We have worked with Mars. So that was a very good experience. And we did our research even in online mode. So we organized the fest even in online mode. So that was again a learning which I think past batches did not have.
Right. Okay. That's great. Coming to Rohan, you have been a part of major law firms like AZB Partners and Desai Devanji. Could you tell me a little about the experience there? How was your experience there?
That's an interesting question. So again, see, the experience is subjective, but mostly like what my experience in terms of law has been that mostly legal practice in India is still traditional. Post 1991, there's just a few firms that have tried to adopt, say, the international style of working where you have associates, then they move up the hierarchy and they become senior associates and then partners. But those firms still are heavily promoter driven, and there's a lot of focus on billable hours. By billable hours, it's something similar to what Ashish was mentioning, that you're supposed to be billing them for at least 12 to 14 to 15 to 16 hours a day, depending on the kind of matters that are there. It's a very the work is definitely cutting edge. If you're in a big firm, let's assume you join AZB, CAMSAM, the kind of deals you'll get to do go into the thousands of crores, big matter clients. But then again, it's just a question of what your interest is and whether you're able to pull off those all-nighters and work in an environment that is, it's, I think, hyper-competitive, hyper-focused on billable hours. So it's very easy to be burned out. And then the number of spots at the partner level are fairly limited. So not everybody is going to move up the food chain. So that again leads to the hyper-competitive nature of firms. And I think there's a fundamental thing that I think we have more lawyers than we actually need. And it's funny that I'm saying it in and now after having done law, but and that's true for the way the law firm market is and the market for, say, joining a litigation chamber is, because unless you have some sort of speciality and you're bringing in money, you're replaceable. The work isn't something which is really, really cutting edge, especially in firms. Maybe litigation, it's different because you need to have experience to know court craft or filings or whatever it is that they do and build a name for yourself. But in firms, if you join as an associate, you're pretty much replaceable because the work you're doing can be done by somebody else. He just needs a fair minimum amount of training. And a lot of the market realizes that, and that's why they're able to push people to work beyond their limits. And that's true for most corporate law firms, especially the big ones. And they do know that if you join at an associate or a senior associate level, you're easily replaceable. But that being said, I mean, it's just, again, a personal choice. Some people get a thrill out of working in corporate law. The suits kind of feel, if that's your vibe, definitely go for it. Do the hard work, reach the partner level. Pay is phenomenal, although you get very minimal amount of time to spend it. Uh, but yeah, I think it's again subjective. For me, initially I wasn't really interested in, actually I wasn't really interested in doing anything in law after studying in the US. So I call it a very expensive career counseling program I went through for 1 year. But so I was just a question of seeing what firms are like and whether you want to do it, so that later on you don't really have a regret of, oh hey, I probably should have joined a firm and worked there. So that was the reason why I joined, and I learned very quickly that this is not something which I would really want to do long term.
Right.
So yeah, it's just a matter of personal choice, but yeah, it's still heavily promoter driven, competitive, long working hours, and no time for yourself.
Rohan, can I disagree with you there?
Yeah.
Given that we have so many people who are pursuing law at the moment, I don't think we have too many lawyers. I just think that we have too many lawyers with the same skill set.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think that's putting it better. We have too many lawyers with the same skill set. I agree.
Okay.
Just to
Yeah.
add to that, I think Ashish has done MBA and law, and this is something which I learned when I was studying in the US, that uh, a lot of the CEOs who are running Fortune 500 companies, they're either from the law school of these top Ivy League schools, or they're from the MBA school. So in I think Europe and the American markets, the legal degree is considered equivalent to an MBA. In fact, in a lot of cases, it's preferred, especially in investment banking, or say like the CEO of American Express, Goldman Sachs. They were all Harvard Law School guys, because uh, I think the point being that in highly regulated sectors, what I've seen that in the American markets, they prefer a law graduate, somebody from a top law school, to be CEO of a company. So that way, is a law degree is basically, it's a practical degree. You're learning how the world operates. So it's like what Jerry Seinfeld says, that the world is a game and the lawyers are the only ones who know the rules. So it's a practical degree to have.
Would I be correct in saying that in the entry level position in a firm, the work is mainly due diligence and research, or are there other kinds of work?
That depends on your partner and the practice you've joined. Uh, it really depends on it really depends on the partner and the practice you've joined. Yes, there is going to be a lot of due diligence and research work, but that due diligence and research work is going to be there till you reach the partner level. You'll see even senior associates, principal associates working and doing DD work, because that's just something that needs to be done. It's it's a thankless job, but there's everybody who's doing it. But frankly, the kind of work you get, it's very difficult to just blanket it and say that all associates are just going to be doing research and due diligence, because a lot of your experience in the firm will depend on the practice area you've chosen and the partner you're working with. And if the partner you're working with is good, he's a nice guy, he's phenomenal, you'll be doing work apart from research and due diligence as well. So again, it's very difficult to give a blanket formula saying that, oh, hey, these guys are just going to do research or due diligence.
Okay. Let me just ask, what is in every young student's mind here? How did you get these jobs? What do you think helped you land a job in AZB and Desai Devanchi?
So AZB and Desai Devanchi both were through networking. I think that's what Ashik was stressing on, is that see, networking is highly important. This is something which I've realized. So the difference between, say, a law school like ours and a law school, say, NLS Bangalore or NLS, say, in Hyderabad, Calcutta, is that the placements, right? Once you're in, it's the same. You're at the same level. So if there are people from you can outcompete them. It's not something that's unfeasible or unfathomable. But the issue is that when you're in a law school like ours, to be able to get those positions, you have to work a bit harder, because the firms are not coming to the school necessarily. So a lot of it will depend on how well you're able to network, how well you're able to get those internships, how well you're able to perform in those internships, whether you're able to build relationships with the partners of the teams you're working with while you were doing that internship, or the associates who can then put your name forward.
Right.
So essentially, it's a networking game, and if you have a godfather-in-law, then nothing like it. It's still a highly nepotistic profession overall, although post 91 coming of firms, corporate law, it's slightly changing, but it's always good to have somebody who has your back and who's probably been in the profession for 25, 30 years.
Right.
I don't know, Ashish would be able to better say that because he's done litigation as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm coming to next. So Ashish, maybe you could put a light on this as well.
So, I mean, I agree with Rohan there. So he said a lot is promoter driven. So a lot of law firms in India, they were started by one or two people or family members, and that is the culture they have been following. So something which I personally do not like in Indian ventures, I will say, it's not just restricted to law firms. Somewhere it comes in the mind of the owner that I own people as well. They lose that respect for people, that if somebody is coming there devoting their time, you don't own them. They may be working for you, but they're not your servants. So that culture is there in law firms also. And the reason why I went independent right after law school was that in my final internship, from where I did not even complete, did not take the certificate. So I got to know about a legal aid case. It was in Madhya Pradesh, and I left. I took permission and said I have to get this done. This juvenile is not being presented before JJB and is being held up in a lockup, not even taken before. It's been 40 years. So I went there, came back, and then I said I'll have to go again because JJB has refused bail given the charges, and I do not understand why you can do it under that law. You cannot deny bail to a juvenile.
Yeah.
So then I again went. Then he told me, if this is the kind of work that interests you, go join Prashant Bhushan. So that was where I realized that no, I don't want to do this because legal is a profession where you're not employees. You're an independent practitioner. Even if you are in a firm, you just take up cases, you help them. You're paid retainer. You're not paid a salary.
Absolutely.
So that kind of liberty I wanted for myself. I was fully aware that I will not get the kind of clients I'll get to work with if I go join a law firm. So that was a conscious decision which I said. Then Rohan was right. It's that moment where you say yes or no, and that changes. Like had I gone ahead and joined a law firm, there would have been two things which would have been different. My profile would have been very, very average, and I would not have been able to defend it before the interview board in my MBA entrance. This allows me to project my profile in a better way. Second, I might not even have gotten time to prepare for it. Because if you don't have time to spend the money, which you are not earning at the entry level, but still, you can't prepare as well.
Right. Coming to the independent practice part of your journey, right out of college, you made your own law firm called Amicus Legal. How many of you were there?
So it was just me and a very close friend, Prakhar Bhatnagar. He's from our batch only. Rohan and I studied with him. He wanted to take up litigation full time. I was sure I'm going to go for MBA, but I needed some experience before that. I did not want to be another fresher in an MBA college. So we decided that I said I'll stay here for 3 years. And we started our own work. We were sure that we'll have to struggle, and we would often talk that there might be a day where we have to set up a bench under a tree. It could happen that way. So we were ready for that risk, and we took that decision.
Exactly. That is what I'm coming to. Starting your own law firm, it sounds like such a huge deal. How do you go forward and do it? How do you carry that out?
See, that there could be many ways of looking at it. My way, again, agrees with Rohan. The work is not difficult. Second, if you can get client, you can get the work done. So if the client is paying you 100 rupees, get an associate, pay him 25 or 50 rupees, he will do the work. The rest is your money, right? So how does it matter? It's a business. It's a law firm, it's a business. You need skills to perform that work. You can either get those skills yourself or you can hire those skills. Those are readily available.
But how do you get the clients? How did you get your first few clients?
So there are two parts to it. One is networking. Networking will get the guy to your office. Then the second is how you charm the person. So depending on from where the client is coming, that is a call that you make within, let's say, a few minutes, if I can be generous. You see, what is the economic status of the guy? What are his political beliefs, religious beliefs? And then you talk to a person. Now you can call me dogmatic here, but it is business. There could be two people walking into my office the same day, and for one person I could be part of the Congress party, for the other I'll be part of the BJP. It doesn't matter to me personally which party is in power. How you talk to the person, it's about building the rapport, right? Once you have that, the person trusts you. He says that all right, he believes in the same things which I believe, right? He will give you the job. Then it is about performing. Once you perform, the repeat business will come. If you do not perform, the business will not come, and there will be bad word of mouth. So you have to make sure that whenever there is work that you do not understand, go seek advice, go to your mentors, contact professors, try and get understanding of law. Don't take up work just because it has come to you, right? It could happen that you might just not earn a single rupee on that case. You hire somebody, a friend, a senior, he'll do everything, he'll take the 100% of the money, but at least the word goes into the market that all right, these people can get the work done.
Right. And during this time of your independent practice, did you have mentors and advisors who guided you and led you through this process?
So when we started on, everybody was like, no, this cannot be done. You have to work as a junior for somebody else. You cannot do this. This cannot happen. Things like that. But once we started going to the board, once we had cases there, we started building the network. We had some seniors who started appreciating us. There were times when we were appreciated by the judge also. One thing which we were very sure about was that we are going to treat the people who work with us very nicely. We are not going to pay them less. The day we can afford them, we will afford them. We will not have juniors just because we can in this particular way. And we will not lie in the court. So there were instances where the judge has really appreciated us. And that is where the seniors will take a note of it. All right, this is a kind of person I would want to have a junior, but he is not ready to be my junior. So then they will also think that all right, if we get a chance, we'll work. So when we'll approach them with briefs, they will listen to us. They will not like, you are so junior, we are not going to work with you. There have been instances where we have been scolding, or we have been scolded for quality of work, but we were sure that we will not repeat the same mistake. And everybody understand. They have also started somewhere. They were also juniors somewhere. They also might have not have the complete understanding of the law. So it's about that.
Okay, I get that. Okay, I have a question for both of you. Since you both have a bit towards the management side, what was your educational background before college? Were you in commerce, science, or humanities? Ashish?
So in 11th I took non-medical because everybody is supposed to be an engineer in this country. I was never a very good student. Professors are sitting here, they can vouch for it. I was never a good student even in the law school. But somehow I scored enough to be able to get non-medical. My parents were of the view that once you have the science stream, you can opt anything. You want to do arts also, you can change it in college, and after half-yearly exams, one can change streams.
Okay.
So in 11th, I completed it and I scored 45%. I passed physics with 6 marks grades. And then I decided that this cannot go on. I do not like these subjects. I don't want to do it. I was sure that I wanted to study arts. So in 12th, since my father was a teacher at that time, he was aware of CBSE rules. He went and talked to my principal that CBSE doesn't say that you have to study the same subjects in 11th and 12th. And he said it will be up to his risk. If he wants to take up subjects in 12th and he doesn't understand, it's his risk. So then they allowed me to choose any subject. So I like computer programming from non-medical. I kept that. I had an ego issue with maths, so I kept that I cannot leave this. I'm not that stupid that I cannot understand it. I took economics, I took history and political science. So that was the process. So sometimes it would happen that I have history class in one section and computer science in the other section. So I choose which subject to study.
You made a nice assortment of subjects.
Tried to.
Yeah. And Rohan, what about you? What was your educational background before college?
Oh, I had commerce with maths, but just to take what Ashik said forward, I think to do something, education hardly matters. And there's a fundamental flaw in the Indian education system, I think, and it goes all the way to college and even after that, masters, PhD, etc. We don't teach students what actually requires to be taught. And this is something which we see when we hire engineers. So for example, in school, I mean, there are so many subjects you've been taught which are completely useless. And by the end of it, I really thought about this, especially when you hire, when you're putting out JDs, you put out what sort of qualifications you need. And frankly, I think in school, all a kid needs to be taught is math, physics, language, and narrational history, which he can read. As long as he knows all these 4 subjects, I don't think he needs to be taught anything beyond that, unless there's something of interest for the kid. Frankly speaking, 11, 12 was still, they were 11, 12 was something which till the 1970s, there was only class 10. Then suddenly you introduced 11, and suddenly you introduced 12. So it's just there's a fundamental rethink that needs to go into the education system, especially on what is being taught to the kids at the school level. I think 90% of the subjects that are taught can completely be junk because they serve absolutely no purpose in building the skill set or the personality of the student. And I think that's something that gets carried on to the college level as well, because when you hire engineers, what they've learned in college is very different from what standards are being used in the market, especially in terms of the programming languages that are being used, the skill set that is required, that is being used. Colleges are still teaching languages that are legacy, developed in the 70s, 80s for computer systems that are no longer being used by cutting edge tech companies. So there's a fundamental gap between what the market requires and what is being taught at educational institutions from the school level till, say, college level. And I think that's the reason why we've seen a proliferation of edtech companies, because frankly, a lot of them have realized that, hey, you're going to school, but there's absolutely no value which the school is adding to your skill set apart from just making you a bit more social and being able to get up in the morning and follow a routine. And there's a real gap, and that's why billions of dollars are flowing into edtech. This is something which large-scale universities, Georgetown, Harvard, etc., are also realizing that they're charging a huge amount of money for some of these liberal art courses, some of these courses which have no relation to what the market is saying in terms of the job demand that is there. And it's not going to fly in the long run because tech is disrupting that. So I really don't think your education matters that much as long as you know you're good at basic math, you have good language skills, and you have an understanding of society and history. I think that's something that's most important.
Right. So I have Rohan's answer. Ashish, what do you think? Like how much do these pre-college education affect or impact the career choices we make? Like, is a person from commerce will be better at starting entrepreneurship or something like that? What do you think?
I do not completely agree with Rohan, and especially his views on liberal arts there. I think those courses play an important role in the society. I think he has gone too far away from our law degree and he no longer believes he's a social engineer. That's why he's saying all of that. Arts has its own place, language has its own place, history also is there. So society, when it is functioning at the highest level, you have diversity, and going forward Rohan is going to say that we hire for diversity, and he's going to look for liberal arts people as well. I can assure you of that. The reason is that how you think is hugely dependent on where you have been, what you have seen, what you have done. Now, a liberal arts student would have had a very different experience, say, from an engineer. An engineer will think and try and solve a problem in a different way. When we say solving a problem, it does not mean you just code. There has to be a thought behind it. That thought cannot just be expected from an engineer every time. There could be problems which a doctor might be able to solve, and the enabler could be a technology. So you need all kinds of thought. Liberal arts and history also have their place. They allow us to become more human. So whatever you're building cannot be devoid of the emotions. And there are courses also on it. There's design courses which says human-centered design. How will you build a product without understanding the human emotions? How will you sell a product without understanding where the need comes? So Rohan understood the pain point that people, when they're trying to buy the property, they feel that need. I mean, they do not understand how to do the due diligence themselves. And it's the most important decision of their life. Had its solution been about buying apples, he would not make money. because that is not a decision that really affects their life. So from where did that understanding come? That came from the different subjects. Now his views and my views are different on it, and everybody can take a different call.
We need a synergy of these views to have a complete understanding, I guess.
It's good to have different views on this. And then
See, I told you he'll look for diversity.
Okay, so there is one more section which interests me, Rohan. Your LLM from Georgetown, Washington, DC, US. So can you first tell me regarding the entry there? How did you get there? What is the application process like? Do you have to clear extra exams like IELTS or TOEFL, something like that?
So I think a lot of people, just before I talk about the application process, I think if you studied in a law school in India, because most of the curriculum is in English, you really don't need to worry about IELTS and TOEFL because it's grade 3 or 4 English. So if somebody is worrying about those exams, then he really needs to introspect what he's actually learned in terms of his speaking skills throughout his entire life. As far as the application process is concerned, it is slightly tedious. Because they require you to write a very detailed SOP about yourself and why you should be accepted into this law school, and what is it and why do you want to do the subject you want to do. And the second thing is that you have to get all the documents out, which basically would involve a provisional degree or your mark sheet. So that for me, it meant dealing with the bureaucracy at IP University, which in itself is a big challenge. And the other thing is that you need to have recommendations from your profs. So it's always good to maintain good relationships with your professors and teachers, because it helps in the long run. You probably don't realize it when you're in your first year or second year, but when you come to your third, fourth year and you realize that you need recommendations, you should have a couple of profs out there who are willing to back you and your application, because a lot of times those applications have to be directly submitted to the university. So the prof also is expected to do some legwork of sending it out on post or uploading it on a website.
Okay.
Post that, I think it's just a lot of it is subjective. They don't really disclose the criteria they follow in terms of accepting a person for LLM. Frankly, when I applied, I really didn't have it in mind that I'm going to go and do an LLM, but I had applied really early on, beginning of my final year in law school. So by December, I had the acceptance. So I just decided, okay, might as well. There's no harm in going and seeing what it is. The process, you have to have two letters of recommendation. You have to have SOP. Some of the universities will call you up for an interview. It's fairly streamlined. They have one website called the Law School Admission Council. All the applications are routed through there. They charge a nominal fee of $165 or $200. I don't remember. You upload it, select the universities there, fill in the criteria for the universities. It's time consuming, but it's not rocket science.
Okay. Okay. And can you tell me a little about the subjects and the curriculum there, LLM from Georgetown?
So it's very different. Law school over there is very different from law school in India. The first difference is that the JDs, the people who are doing undergrad in law over there, they're not directly out of high school because it's compulsorily a 3-year course. So most of the people who would come to some of the top law schools, including say people who were there in my some of the classes which I took in Georgetown, a lot of them had already worked somewhere previously. So it's a very mature batch of students. In fact, if you go directly without work experience to do an LLM, you'll usually find that you're the youngest person in your class. The second thing is that a lot of the barring, so this is something which is very interesting, the way the course is structured. Even for the JDs who are doing undergrad and even for the LLMs, you can choose the subjects you wish to study, barring a few compulsory requirements. So for example, if you're doing undergrad in law or you're doing an LLM and you want to give the bar exam, torts, contracts, and professional ethics are subjects which are compulsory. Apart from that, you can take any subject you want as long as you fulfill the credit requirement. So the idea being that once the basics of contract and tort are clear, which is the foundation of all law, you're free to choose the subjects you wish to study as long as you're able to fulfill the credit. So if somebody is really interested in doing criminal, he'll just take all the credits of criminal law. somebody is interested in corporate, he'll just do that. If somebody is interested in banking and debt, he'll take that. If somebody is interested in securities, he'll take that. I was doing business and economic law, so most of my courses were around basically corporate law, security, debt restructuring, and project finance.
Okay. All right. And yeah, you could tell me a little about the life there in Georgetown and in US itself.
So campus is it's so big. So it's campus life is very different from India because I think Indian college campuses are an extension of high school. There's still a lot of there's a lot of pressure from the higher ups to control the students and the life, etc. Maybe that's because we're still a feudal society. I don't know if Ashish will probably disagree with me, but we're still pretty feudal in some of our ways. Parents like to control their kids till the time they're married, and then they want to control their grandkids. So it's just something which is ingrained over there. Campus life is fairly easygoing. There's no one of the biggest advantages is there's no attendance requirement, and so it's on the prof. If his class is good, you're going to attend it. If his class is not good, you're not going to attend it. And there's a massive feedback form for that as well. So if a professor consistently is getting bad feedback from the students, likelihood of his class being dropped is fairly high. The feedback loop from the students to the professors is a very honest assessment because frankly, people who come into law school are spending a lot of money there. Somebody who's coming to Georgetown is down by $150,000 to $200,000, and he's expecting to recover it in the next 3-4 years when he starts working. So if he's paying that amount of money, he expects that kind of service. The life is fairly chilled. You can come to class, eat a pizza while the professor is teaching, and nobody's going to say anything to you. You can have beer on campus. They have a bar there. Every Wednesdays 3 to 5 they have happy hours where everybody will come sit in the lawn, drink, have a good time. The professors would be there. The exams are fairly competitive, and they're basically legal problems. Depending on the subject you've chosen, it won't be a direct question the way we have it in India. They'll basically give you a problem and you have to solve it as a lawyer. So that is challenging. The subjects are challenging, the studies are challenging, but it's more chilled out in terms of the culture and the vibe.
Right.
Rohan, can I ask one question?
Yeah.
Did you guys also have block courses?
Block
courses where they just teach you everything in a week and you have your exam, you can just spend the rest of the semester?
No, we didn't have any block courses. We didn't have any.
Okay, I have a question here from the participant which is relevant here. And would you say does an LLM in the US open any path to a permanent career there? Or its purpose is just to increase the prospects of a better career in India itself?
So, okay. I'll give you the two-part answer. First one for the US, it's very difficult. It's very, very tough. Because you have to realize that law everywhere is a very jurisdictional profession. The laws are different. People prefer guys who studied the law there to practice there. US especially so because each state has its own bar. So if you are going there doing an LLM, the likelihood of you finding a job is very, very difficult. It's not as if it can't happen. The reasons why it's very difficult is like I told you, law is a jurisdictional profession. So you have to clear one of the bars to be able to actually land a job in the firm there because otherwise they won't hire you. So if you go to, say, the law school I went to, or you go to Harvard Law School, Stanford, you have an opportunity to be able to give the California bar or the New York bar. Both exams are very, very tough. It's not easy. It's not easy to clear the bar, especially when you're competing with people who are studying for 3 years and you're studying the same subject for 1 year. So you have to cram it in a year. There were batchmates of mine who cleared the bar and got a job there. But then the second issue is the visa regulations that are there. US is especially skewed towards STEM. They prefer people from science, technology, engineering, and math background in terms of the visa application and the people who will get an H-1B and then preference over a green card. If you're a lawyer, it's tougher because US again has too many lawyers with the same skill set, like Ashish said. So they don't really want external lawyers coming up and taking being ambulance chasers there because there are already a lot of them. As far as increasing the employment prospects in India are concerned, I don't think it really matters. If you join ultimately, I think law is a profession where you get paid for your experience and the skills you gain over time in terms of your experience. So if you join a firm and you worked as an associate throughout, somebody comes as an LLM, he's at the same level as you are. So I think it'll help if you want to go down the academic route, maybe later on do a PhD in law. I think then obviously you need to have a master's. As far as the real boost in terms of your internal prospects in the firm here or practice here, I think in my experience, it's fairly minimal.
Right. Okay. I have one general question for you, Ashish sir.
Just Ashish is fine.
Ashish, what would you say are some of your most root habits, some essential habits, which if you remove from your routine, it will affect you?
Not forming habits could be one of the greatest habits I have.
Okay. Fair.
I think this question in India comes even in interviews, what you like to do.
Oh.
I think that has to do with what Rohan was saying. School puts you in that monotonous schedule. You get up, you go to school, you come back. You have interest in sports, you go to the nearby club, you play. You have interest in music, you go to music class. That's how we have been taught. Not having habits is required because the world has changed. Before COVID hit us, everybody was saying it is a VUCA world, which is volatile, uncertain. All right. Now that world, nobody knows what it is. It's certainly very uncertain. Habits are there for some period, right? If that is not required, why do you want it? You can have people can say waking up early is good and everybody should do it. That's a habit. But if you have a night shift, you work the graveyard shift. What are you doing by waking up early? So it depends from person to person. Habits, you need it, you build it at that time. You don't need it, don't build it. That's up to you. I mean, I am somebody who changes things very quickly. If I don't like something, I will change it. If I don't like a job, I will not do it. I talk to my boss, give me some project. I don't like studying, I will not study that subject no matter what the consequences are. It all again has to do with what your background are. Like Rohan, I also did not have any financial burden on me. I did not have to take care of my parents. That way I was very free, could do what I wanted to do. So do not have any such habits. Maybe Rohan can share his habits.
I also agree with what you said, especially the waking up in the morning part. I think the reason for that was because for a good 12,000 years of civilized existence, we were without electricity. So essentially by 6 o'clock, you had to have your dinner and sit by the fireplace and go to sleep. I think that's not the case now. So it's better to adopt to the modern times. And yeah, I don't think there's any habit as such. You just do what works for you at any given point of time.
Right. Okay. I have another question from the participant. Any one of you could shed light on it. They are asking that can you work in a law firm and have a practice on the criminal side by side? Can you do them both? What do you think?
So I doubt it. A, you won't have the time, and B, I mean, if you're in a law firm, you'll be, even if you're in, I don't know, like if you're doing litigation in law firm, maybe you can do criminal law for the firm, but not for yourself.
Right.
And I think they have a non-compete or something. They won't allow you to take up matters outside.
Okay. All right. Just one more question, and then I could wrap this up. Another one from the participant itself. They're asking about MBA from foreign countries. Whether is it worth it?
So if you're going to pay $200,000, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, that is the point. See, the curriculum more or less is similar everywhere. It is up to you where you are going to settle down. If you are going to settle down in US, doing an MBA from India doesn't make much sense. If you have a lot of money, GMAT is easier than CAT. That everybody knows. So You can crack GMAT, go outside, study. If you can afford that and you want to spend your, and if you can't afford it, then you're okay with having an education loan for next 25 years. So that is your choice. Uh, no, this problem, I think a lot of people have this thing that they want to follow the footsteps of somebody. They think that somebody has done this will work for me. But they don't see that given the population size, there are a lot many people who are doing the same thing, and then we all end up with the same thing. Think about what you want to do, why you want to do it. Don't do it because it seems very rosy at the moment. So when I was in 12th, I was sure I'll get an MBA one day. The reasons were very different. I never said that I want a big package or anything of that sort. And even right now, when I selected jobs, it was not because of the package that they are offering. That is not the reason why I should do. You should always seek learning. What is it that you want to be able to get out of a job should not be money. Same should be for the course. If you came to law thinking that you will get into a top law firm and earn money, that I think there your thinking process needs a little bit of correction. It may or may not happen. Make your decisions on the worst that can happen to you. If you're okay with being a poor lawyer, I think that's a great choice. If you're okay with getting an MBA and then trying something out and failing again and again, but learning every time you fail, I think that is a good. So if you think that going to US and pursuing an MBA there is a good fit for you, do it. If it is not a good fit for you, don't do it. Doing business cannot be taught. That was the understanding everybody had before America started teaching everybody MBA. As I said, MBA teaches you how to scale a business. It doesn't teach you how to start a business, build one, find a product, or be good with people. Those are the skills that you will require. In India, any Marwadi or Baniya is doing better than that. Not the caste wise, I mean those who are in that profession. They're always polite, they're very humble. Go to a Kirana store in a small town, whereas go to a Kirana store in Delhi. The way those two people will talk is very, very different. A small town Kirana shop man is a very humble, he will bow down, he will say all sort of things and he'll buy. So I'll give you an example. So my mother would go out to shop for sarees and sometimes I accompany her. And those person will always be very polite to you but shout at their junior just to show that they care more about the people and they will feel you respected and boost your ego. You'll say, this is the place I want to buy from. So you don't need an MBA to learn that. You can see that around and that's just personal opinion. But if you want to go to US, go. I think it would be great.
Yeah. Okay. I could go on and on with this conversation, but we have already taken a little over an hour. So I'll just wrap it up by asking Ashish your last words for our participants here. Is there anything you want to say, any advice you want to give to them?
Don't be stressed, have fun. It's just life. Everybody ends up making the amount of money they need for themselves. Don't run after it. It will come if it has to come.
Okay. And Rohan, how I want you to end with this is just answer me this last question. How, if any, has law helped you in entrepreneurship?
That's a interesting question. I think okay. I'll just I'll put it in. I'll just say that to be an entrepreneur, there are three skills that you need. A, you need to be a people's person. B, you need to be able to sell. Like you have to be an expert salesman, right? And three, you have to have an inherent ability to be able to take the risk and live with the anxiety and sort of fear that brings with it, because there's a lot of it that happens, right? I think having a law degree helps you navigate this in a slightly better way, because the day I wanted to start a company, I knew, okay, what needs to be done, right? You need to have, say, an employment agreement. Somebody who's not done law won't even know the basis of that. So you have a standard structure ready. It really helped. I think it really helped during the fundraise, because venture capital terms are quite tricky. You have to be able to read the term sheet and then the investment agreement and the shareholder agreement well. Even though I did not do the transaction myself, we had a firm advising us from our side. But it was quite advantageous to be a lawyer, because I could understand the terms better and then explain it to the team and the co-founders. So It's a practical degree. That's what
Right.
see. It's a game, and if you know the rules, it's always good. You can send others to the Monopoly jail.
Okay, that's perfect. I would like to wrap this session up by calling Hemant Krishna to deliver the vote of thanks to our esteemed guests.
On the behalf of the LEIC team, I extend a heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guests, Mr. Rohan Sridhar and Mr. Ashish Bharadwaj, who spared time from their busy schedule to grace the occasion. We can definitely learn from their enriching experience. The valuable inputs regarding entrepreneurship, time management, and so much more will help us to cope up with the challenges ahead. The session was indeed an enlightening one. I would also like to extend the gratitude to our esteemed Dean, Professor Dr. A.P. Singh, for providing us a platform to conduct the event. I would like to thank the faculty coordinators, Dr. Anuradha Jha ma'am, Dr. Zubair Ahmed Khan sir, Dr. Sakti Velsha for technical and support and encouragement, the esteemed faculty members, the participants who were listening to the session patiently, and the student coordinators, Ankit, Anu, Prajwal, Akshita, for smooth functioning of the event. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for sparing your time for us.
Thank you so much, Ashish. Thank you so much, Rohan,
Thank you
for
so much.
sharing your valuable time.
Thank you so
I'm
much.
sure it will be really helpful to all of us.
And we look forward to your feedback for us. Sir.
Yes,
Not
definitely.
here, and you can maybe share on personal.